and when the very nature of the nation that you live in and the very nature of your existence has changed to the terms and conditions of those who came from outside to wipe out everything that you and your ancestors believed in. Who is us and who is them? Who is us and what is that cultural identity that defines us? It's not a way of life. See, if a if a tribal cult, wherever from somewhere in the world, believes that murder and rape is a civilizational tradition that they followed, we are not going to call it culture. We won't say, oh, they're such cultured people, they like to rape and plunder. It is a widely held belief, even within the limited confines of the constitution, that India is a civilizational nation. It is a civilizational land and an entity with a cumulative knowledge of thousands and thousands of years. However, when we became a nation state, the great minds decided that we should be divorced from our ancient civilization and our knowledge system. Welcome everybody and thank you for being here. It's a Sunday and I know I would not probably sit in an auditorium to listen to 5 middle-aged commentators on culture, but you're here and thank you so much. And I hope we have an informative and exciting conversation with lots of good questions as well. Now, the subject of this panel is very interesting. Some of the greatest conflicts in the world have started because of the need of man to preserve their cultural identity from external onslaught. And therefore, it becomes very imperative to understand what culture is, what cultural identity is, and why civilizational battles are fought to preserve this cultural identity. Now, we can get into the technicalities of what culture is. We can get into the technicalities of how sometimes we believe that even religious, ritualistic ceremonies are actually just symbols of culture, just cultural events, like we've seen in Bengal itself, where a lot of people have started to say that Durga Puja is not religious, it's merely a cultural festival. However, religion itself, rituals itself, tradition, symbols, temples, everything is a part of your cultural identity, is a part of our dharmic cultural identity, as we belong to a civilizational country called Bharat. And therefore, it becomes essential to not reduce culture to merely the behavior of a set of people during a given set of time, but a tradition and something that has been passed on from thousands of years, a culmination of knowledge, the culmination of traditions, oral and otherwise, the culmination of our faith, our belief, and something that our ancestors fought and died for. And therefore, it becomes important to have this debate and discussion to define what the contours of that culture is and what the boundaries of that culture is. Because unless you know the boundaries of your cultural identity and the cultural identity that binds all of us together as Bharatiya, you don't know what you're out to protect. If you think that culture is everything and anything that a set of people like to do, you will not know when that culture is wiped out and when the very nature of the nation that you live in and the very nature of your existence has changed to the terms and conditions of those who came from outside to wipe out everything that you and your ancestors believed in. Who is us and who is them? Who is us and what is that cultural identity that defines us? And what is them? And what is that identity that defines them? The them that want to decimate and erase your very cultural identity that binds all of us in this room together. So I hope that this discussion will be fruitful and we will be able to come up with at least a set of non-negotiables as to what defines our cultural identity and what binds us all together. And to start off this panel, I'd like to start with Pankaj. Pankaj, what do you think defines not just culture, but also our cultural identity as Bharatiyas? Because unless we define our cultural identity, we don't know what direction this nation should take. And since we are in the presence of such eminent minds from IIT Kharagpur, how do you see cultural identity of a Bharatiya?
Before we discuss what Bharati cultural identity is, we also need to discuss what these words mean for us. They are English words, of course, but what do we mean by their equivalent in our culture? What do we mean when we say culture? What do we think in our minds when we say culture? What do we think in our minds when we say identity? Culture, I'm not going to go into dictionary definitions there, everyone can look them up, and this is not a research paper. But as the definitions go about culture in the West, the most common perception of culture is when you use the forces of science and technology to control the power of nature and bend it towards the use of man. That is what they see, what has been perceived as culture all the time. They will define it as a set of beliefs and ideas, but how culture has been defined, the man versus nature binary has been extremely defined there. That is something which is starkly not just in contrast, but exactly opposite of how we have seen a culture, and they are completely different even in our language. Culture and nature in our civilization, and this is a very important point which we do not stress upon enough, they are completely complementary of each other. They have, uh, one has supported and nourished the other. Culture has supported the idea and the structure of nature. I'll go just into a small explanation of it. What happens? Why do we need culture? Because I will take a very popular example for many of you. You are from IIT Kharagpur. If you, I am old, but not old enough to bring in the reference of Firefly. There is a cult sci-fi classic which they only shot 13 episodes. And in that there is a beautiful scene. They are outside many galaxies. They are not even in our galaxies. They are in the ship. And the heroine, the actress, the primary actress of the TV serial, she is being pursued by a side hero. And the side hero says, and she is in love with some other man, the major protagonist of the series. And he says, but here, he is not here. And who's looking? How does it matter? We are so many galaxies away from home. And she replies, that is exactly why the rules matter the most. So here is a very critical point which he is alluding to. People say that the rules of cultural rules are arbitrary, that marriage doesn't exist in nature. All of these rules don't exist in nature. These cultural rules are arbitrary and made by man. And by saying that, they think that they have made their point, that just because they are made man-made, just because they are social and cultural, they should not be there. Yes, they are arbitrary. And that is why, because these rules are needed, because we have broken the boundaries of nature, we have broken the ecosystems that naturally exist in nature. When we, as man, came out of the food chain, nature has a natural balance. Everyone is at the same time a hunter and hunted. But when we became the apex predator through technology, that ecosystem collapsed suddenly. We became the supreme apex predator and we were not hunted, not limited by any condition. That is when culture comes up and climbs up these boundaries, which are arbitrary, which are created by man, but which nourish and protect nature, and at the same time give you spiritual means to transcend the boundaries of nature, which is the most beautiful thing about Sanatana Dharma. It tells you exactly what your boundaries are in this life, and at the same time tells you how to spiritually transcend it. This binary can be seen in the words that we use for culture and nature. Nature is Prakriti, culture is Sanskriti, that which you refine on nature and not that which you go against. This binary you can see throughout our civilization, and it is the greatest achievement in many ways of our civilization. There is a central debate in our culture, you will find it in all texts, Desiya and Margiya. We saw the cultural performances yesterday. The debate is always between, in the West you see there is a great debate and clash and great violence between what they call as vernacular, local, regional cultures, languages, and the classical languages, classical cultures. So for example, Latin is always in clash with the vernacular languages. The central culture is always out to destroy the local regional cultures, and regional cultures become secessionists. But here, once again, this binary is complementary. The Desiya and Margiya, they always go together. For example, our pantheon of gods, wherever we have gone, we have always incorporated and given the central space to the local and the regional, including in religion, in deities, in food, and everywhere else. That is why they are complementary. This debate is bigger, but then this binary is seen through language also. There is Sanskrit and Prakrit. Prakrit, that which naturally exists. Desi is what naturally comes to you, and then you have an aspiration which is greater, spiritually greater, that you aspire to. That is the marg. That is Sanskrit. And at last, there is the binary Lok and Shastra. We have a binary which has always been complementary. Our Shastras have actually made our folk culture stronger. And you can see the deepest of truths that are contained in our Shastras in almost all of the folk cultures that you see today. Kumar Swami even said that during the medieval era, when there were many attacks on our culture and the Margiya was destroyed, it actually fled and took refuge in Desi. And today, actually, you can see it better reflected in those folk cultures. So this is how complementary. When the Margiya was destroyed and it did not have the enough space, the Desi protected it. That's how complementary the binary was. So this is what culture means to us. For us, yes, we are universal. Yes, Sanatana Dharma is universal. But not if you go against these precepts. Not if you say that this idea of culture is wrong. And that brings us to identity. That if this is what culture is, then what are identities? I am not an authority of speaking on those ideas that I am touching upon. If my guru would be listening to me, he would be scolding me like always. But since this cannot be completed without that idea, we consider that our truest identity is that we are not just life, we are the supreme consciousness, which is our idea of divine. We think that we are different. I think that I am Pankaj Saxena, you think that you are you, because we are, the one has forgotten its true nature and has become me. And so, our truest identity is the supreme identity. But the trick here is, this is how Sanatana Dharma is. It always caters to all your tendencies. We cannot, in this world, for example, they say that why do you need to worship idols when you can worship them inside? You will need the Vigraha until you come at that level when you do not need the Vigraha. You will need the identity until you reach a stage where you do not need the identity. So at the same time, it caters to all the identities. There is the individual. We have our individual identity. We have our identity of family. Then there is Kutumba. Then all the identities, community, Desh and Dharma. And there is a pyramid of priorities also. That if there is a clash between these two identities, what takes priority? But all of these identities are ensconced within each other. They nourish and nurture each other. And by living wherever you are born in whatever circumstances, by living through the identities, it doesn't matter what you are. You might be born as a king, you might be born as a pauper. Just by living through your duty, your responsibilities, you will get absolved of identities, all identities at last. That is the idea. And you will move on the path where there you do not need any identity. At the same time, practicing identity, and by practicing identity through dharma, you reach a stage where you do not need identity. Now, just a little reflection on it. If you see identity through this lens, there is no ultimate clash. There is no violence at a level which we see in all other cultures, where we see that Latin has tried to destroy all other vernacular languages, where when they grow, they say that Latin is just elitist. When linguistic identities harden so much that there are great wars based on these identities. Ours is a culture, ours is a civilization which has prevented it, all of this clash and institutionalized the harmony, the very basic harmony that is there. We practice identity and at the same time we get absolved of it. And that is the idea of all Hindu rituals also. That if you do anything through dharma, artha and kam, if you fulfill artha and kam through dharma, you will be absolved of it. If you follow it by adharma, that desire will keep increasing. Similarly, if you follow your identity with dharma, one day and there will come a stage where you won't find any need of it. And at one level, there won't be any need of it. But if you follow it through an adharmic idea, there will be clash with all other identities. That is the central idea of culture, about culture and identity of Sanatana Dharma, as I have imperfectly understood it. So that's where I would like to stop. Thank you.
Nice. I think there are two central points. One is that you said culture, it's in man's nature to take and it's in man's nature to destroy. And therefore culture teaches us how much we can take so that we can coexist. And that's what a dharmic cultural identity is. And second, that you will not be in a state of conflict if you can successfully live by the dharmic cultural identity instead of the adharmic cultural identity. Now, Raghav ji, I would like to ask you. Now, we've touched upon the spiritual aspect of dharmic identity, but in very real terms, we are in a newly developed, newly created nation state. 70 years, 75 years, 100, it's not very long to be a nation state. And cultural identity has very quickly been dissolved to mean something very imported instead of a debate and discussion on what dharmic identity is and what the cultural identity of the nation should be. It is more about the individual cultural identity rather than the national dharmic or cultural identity. So, how would you define cultural identity with respect to Bharat as a political nation state and a newly created one at that?
So, Hari Om, Namaste. I'm back here. We spoke about the civilizational identity yesterday because we said while there are three different topics to my mind, and the objective of this entire plan that we had with Samvad is to create the notion of integral unity, and therefore identities. Pankaj spoke about the multiple layers of identity. If there is a civilizational identity that we need to understand going back into our origins, there is at the next level the cultural identity that will help us live that civilizational identity. And all of this happens within the boundaries of what we call the nation state, and therefore you need to understand what the threats are to the sacred geography. Without the idea of sacred, there is no culture. In fact, one of the best definitions of culture that come to our minds is what the great D.V. Gundappa had said. If an object in nature is made sacred by the act of man, that is culture. Now, to answer Nupu's question about how do we understand this not just as a political entity, how do we actually insulate ourselves from the dilution of our cultural identity, let me share a personal experience that I've had with a recent incident that came out, which sort of explained to me everything that Pankaj has told me about. You guys are hearing Pankaj, I listen to him every day. So I have learned a lot about what I know about culture through my conversations with him. But this incident really hit the point home. About 3 months ago, there was this very tragic train accident in Odisha. I think Balasore, all of you must have seen this. Very, very tragic, a matter of seconds, the train collapsed and lives were lost in hundreds. And it's natural for all of us to feel the shared grief and feel that emotion, and then we move on. At the end of the day, it's just one Twitter scroll away, or maybe one newspaper headline away. But the locals, the villagers in the nearby area, 11 days after that train accident, they came together, and this was just a clip on the news for just a few seconds. And on the 11th day, they came together to offer the Shraddh Karm for those who died. Now, I want us to reflect on this for a minute to truly understand what culture is. There is no state incentive. There is no state imperative that said you need to come together. There is no market incentive. There is no rational analysis of why those villagers came together to actually offer something to people that they've never met, to somebody that has no impact on their life. And what does this ritual mean? What does offering this Shraddh Karm mean? You have to tonsure your head. You have to not have food for the entire day. You need to organize yourself, and you need to commit yourself to doing something month on month. Why did they do this? If you truly have to understand the wonder that is Bharat, that has so deliberately been obfuscated to us from education, from politics, we have to bring back that sense of what is this nation built on. This nation is not built on just an idea of ethnicity, one race, one religion, one language. We proudly say this, but we do not deeply understand the wonder that Pankaj spoke about, the synthesis of the Saguna and Nirguna. Now, the reason they came together is because they have certain ideas about the Atma, about Punarjanma. They understood that if you do not offer that ritual, the people who died abruptly, the people who died suddenly, death is of great significance in the Indian culture. Unless you understand death, you do not understand the Indian culture. because death has a certain kind of sacrality to it, because the Atma is not bound by it, and it has to have a passage, and it has to come back. They offered that ritual because they believed in the fundamental tenet of Punarjanma, because the Atma has to go and come back. And this is the folk culture. Pankaj spoke about the great synthesis between the Margiya and Deshiya. When I was listening to a Shastra scholar recently, he advises us, and he said, and he is a Vedanta expert. His entire study is of Viveka Chudamani, of all the great texts of the Shastra tradition. And he is in Maharashtra, and he said, when I heard the folk songs of the Varkari tradition, one person who's just going on the road with just one instrument, he is speaking absolute highest metaphysics of Vedanta. I see no difference between Shankara and what this person on the road is saying. Now think about this wonder. Think about this idea of one entire space time continuum over whatever your pick is, 5,000, 7,000, 3,000 years, whatever it is. Think about the 2,000 square kilometers by 1,800 square kilometers. What does it take to bind this kind of diversity across that kind of space time into one nation, one civilization? You and I are inheritors of that civilization. It is not on the basis of a political identity. It is not on the basis of one language. It is not on the basis of a skin color. It is not on the basis of genetics. It is on the basis, this can only happen, and we need to really think about this and wonder, this can only happen, this kind of unity, this kind of oneness can only happen when two conditions are met, that you are simultaneously experiencing and articulating the universal. Because if I have an idea of karma, if I do namaste here, it is decodable only in this geography as a sacred act. You might not know the metaphysics of it. You might not even understand that I'm bowing to the divinity in you. This is Purusha, this is Prakriti, this is coming together, this is creation. But culturally, we are all of the same opinion that this is a mark of respect. And that happens when there is an idea of sacred geography. So the first element that this civilization was built on, and the common culture that was built on, was the notion of sacred. And this is critical because all of modernity, whether it is education, technology, culture, public discourse, is pushing you to believe that there is meaninglessness in life. And that, as the inheritors of the great sacred civilization of Bharata Varsha, there is no greater disservice that we can do to the world than by succumbing to the idea of meaningless and nihilism. The villagers in Odisha did not. But a lot of us in the urban setups are, because we are educated. But their education is about the eternal. It is about the universal that is always true across space and time. But at the same time, if it is universal but not deeply personally accessible, it will not sustain. You and I need to feel the same pain so that when you hear an idea of karma and punarjanma, you have the access to relate to it. If you reach the stage of life where you started questioning your own identity about why am I here? What is the purpose of my birth? Things happen to all of us. Life will intrude, life will teach, it has to take its course. And at those points, if you do not have a fundamental spiritual anchor or a metaphysical understanding that comes to you from your civilization, you basically lose the cradle that can hold you when you fall down. So this idea that India is a political entity, India is just like Nupur said, the idea of diluting culture and relegating it to acts of human compassion and human morality is the most dangerous notion, because we are fallible, we are vulnerable, we are not perfect. And this civilization was built on the deepest yogic metaphysics that understood what is the upside potential you have. That is why you said you're potentially divine. But it also understood and sort of built guardrails for the lowest tendencies that you can have. We just need to look at the news that is coming up from Israel yesterday to understand the kind of debauchery, the kind of demagoguery that can happen when you lose culture, when your metaphysics does not have the truth. So this is a civilization that has given you simultaneously the universal and the personal, and it has built that into rituals, into everyday acts. You don't even need to think about it. The villagers in Odisha did not rationalize or philosophize about what is Atma, what is karma, what is Punarjanma. They are living it. So culture is what we live, but culture is not the shallow act of food, selfie and food and language and dress. The deep part of culture comes from the deepest understanding of life, which is based on the truth that you and I share, that we are here for a finite time. We have different stages of our physical existence, and there is something beyond that we naturally aspire to. Right? There is something that we absolutely feel within the voice in our minds, and culture is something that brings all of that voice into an experiential reality. So, therefore, anything that obfuscates or kills our culture is basically killing your well being. It is killing your ability to find that cradle when life will eventually and inevitably get you to the point of despair. This will happen. There is nobody here who is going to come out unscathed. The only thing is whether you have the means when you fall down to get up again, and culture is that light on the path back home. We'll talk about it in a little bit more.
So far, we've discovered more on the spiritual realm of what culture and our cultural identity as a civilizational status. But Amiji, I would like to, since we've discussed the spiritual part, let's go back to history and then we can come back to the present with Dr. Rinku. Historically, what we call itihasa and what has been deracinated as mythology by a lot of elements, but what we like to call itihasa. If we pick up our own itihasa and if we trace back the cultural identity from itihasa to, again, the current modern nation state that we live in, how do we rationalize the cultural identity that has flown from thousands of years of civilization and consciousness to what we are today?
Namaste, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri Ram. So before I answer the itihas question, I must say that in terms of metaphysics and all, I must be what we say kacha limbu. But my study of trying to understand culture was not very organic. It was organic in the sense when I was questioned. So let me tell you this incident that happened to me once in US. This was probably 2007, 2008. And it was a consulting team. We were people from 20 different countries. We were all together. And one night we had this motto: work hard and party harder. Yeah. So work to hota kitna tha wo jaane do, but parties were definitely harder. So it was evening, alcohol was free flowing, and I had a friend. I had met a girl there who was a Colombian. So Colombian American, and she got drunk. She got very drunk. I was not drinking. I was a teetotaler. So she got drunk and she started crying, and I'm like, "What happened?" She's like, "Hey, you know what? I think I'm going to die single." And I'm like, "Why do you say so?" Because she's like, "I'm not lucky as you. You are so lucky to be an Indian." And I'm like, "Achanak se, maybe she's drunk, but what is about this Indian and why is she relating the two?" And she says, "You know, you Indians, you are so lucky." She said she had a friend. She studied with this Indian girl in Stanford, and this Indian girl was dating a guy for 5 years. Okay. 5 साल बाद उनका breakup हो गया. So the girl was obviously very upset. However, in 6 months, the girl's mother found her a guy. Okay. Abhi, what is this arranged setup? We will be like, ayo. So as soon as she said arranged setup, I got very defensive. I'm like, arey, you know what? Sabke saath nahi hota hai. It's not for everybody, but parents try. It's not so bad, vagere, vagere. And she's like, no. Don't be defensive. I think it's great because her parents care for her. When her mother realized that she's going to be alone, the mother helped her find a partner and she's going to get married. And in my house, I had a breakup and nobody cares. It's all on me. If I don't find a partner, my parents are not going to care. They'll be like, "Rehna hai, waise raho, your life." Right? And for me, this was quite a jhatka. Now, I'm not saying, okay, there are not that many parents sitting out here. Nahi to kal jaake all these 100, 200 people will be on Shaadi.com. That's not what I mean. Yeah, that's not what I mean. But the thing is, sometimes we look at ourselves, we tend to look at ourselves and value ourselves more when it comes from outside. The same thing happened to me in the US, and this time it was a Uber cab driver. It was an African-American girl. Now, it's very interesting, right? Although Indians have been abroad for so many years, they still follow all these practices. We can say, "Arey, Bharatiya hai, Orthodox hai, whatever, whatever." But where is this coming from? It is coming from this thing which we call Grahasthashram, and the importance of Grahasthashram. Now we don't behave that way, or because we are thinking of it all the time. But where is it? What is the framework? It is a Purushartha, which both Pankaj and Raghav have spoken about, right? Now, so anyways, this was just a lighter which is an incident which really made me think and ask myself, then what is it to be a Hindu? What is it that the culture I represent? And keeping on the same theme of questioning back, yesterday what happened in Israel, and I'll link it back to the Itihas, which Raghav also mentioned, right? The debauchery. I think the one image, one video which really shocked me yesterday was that there was this Israeli female soldier. She was dead. Her dead body was being paraded naked by the terrorists, yeah? And they were laughing over it, and they were jumping and dancing and crying. And it got me thinking, how do we treat our how do we treat our enemy soldiers? We have army personnel, our army majors sitting here. As Indians, however bad a terrorist is, however bad he's done to us, we have always given them respect. Now, is that just naturally because now we are India and we have some moral high ground? No. What does our Itihas say? How did Sri Ram treat Ravan after he was dead? Vibhishan says, he's my brother, and if you permit, now Vibhishan is asking Sri Ram, if you permit, I want to give him a proper Vedic Anteshti, yeah? And Sri Ram says, of course, he should deserve the respect that he's worthy of. He's dead now. And once the person is dead, the enmity is gone. He is another person who deserves my respect. And that is, and he should get all the rights and all the anteshti and the respect that a person needs to get. Ravan was a guy who had taken away not just his wife, but he had violated so many other women. But even then, fighting him was important. That was Sri Ram's Raj Dharma, that was Sri Ram's Pati Dharma. But at the end of it, when a person dies, you don't hold on to it. So the way we are behaving now with our enemies, it's coming from how the Itihas has treated them, right? Anything that we behave today, you will see that you will find some linkages in the Itihas. For example, let's see another example. Whenever people go abroad, or we have diaspora across the world, right? And nowhere do we see people saying, "Arey nahi, if I am in this country, abhi to main Manu ka vaad idhar laga dunga." Have you seen anybody in America saying, "No, I want to impose Manusmriti here"? They accept the law of the land. Manusmriti, good or bad, I'm not getting into. I'm just saying, yeah, we accept the rule law of the land anywhere and everywhere. How is that? How is that we are so comfortable with this kind of diversity? And is it that we behave that way only when we go out? Or is it when they come to us as well? Let's go back to history. What happened to the Parsis? What happened to the Jews? What happened to the Syrian Christians? They came and they are still what they are, right? They have gotten the respect, they have gotten the dignity that they deserve to follow the path they have followed. How has that been possible? Again, let's go back. Let's go back to the Itihasa. Sri Ram met so many different tribes and people along the way, right? There was an inherent unity which Raghav spoke of. But some were the Rakshasas, some were Vanaras, right? And did they try to change the way they live? There was an inherent acceptance. Why was that inherent acceptance? Because all said and done, your paddhatis can be different. Ekam sat bahuda vipravadanti is what we say. That the ultimate truth is this truth which he spoke about, which Pankaj spoke about. That which is beyond the identity, right? But there could be multiple ways to get there. Now, as long as there is a mutual respect, and that is important, mutual respect and mutual understanding, you can live your way, I can live my way. There is a question asked to Vidur that what is dharma? Yeah, and Vidur says only that is dharma which does not violate anybody else's dharma. What is that? We have lived by that I will live my dharma, you live your dharma. You live your rituals, you follow your principles and everything. But let us allow each other that space without grabbing onto each other, right? Again, where is this coming from? The way we behave today, it is coming from the way our ancestors have behaved. And this is coming from the inherent metaphysics of the Sanatan Dharma that we speak about, right? Let's take one more example. Again, I'll take examples which I have actually seen, yeah. And when I was working in Hong Kong, again, we had multiple people. I have time, right? I can take 2 more minutes. Yeah. So I was working with different kinds of people, and it was very interesting that while we say stereotypes don't matter, stereotypes are very real. If there were 2 Japanese in my team, and there were 2 Koreans, and there were 2 Australians, and there were 2 Americans, they all behaved in a very predictable way, which was very different from how I or another Indian who was probably a 3rd generation American behaved, or a 3rd generation African Indian behaved, yeah? We were very similar. What was that? We were very comfortable with chaos more often than not. If you see today, Indians are at the top positions at a lot of places, right? Lot of international companies, be it a German company, be it a Danish company, be it American company. Why is that so? Because in a world of chaos, we somehow find our way and survive. How is that? Now, this is a little, people might say that I'm stretching it a little, but think about it. In Ramayana, Sri Ram fights his own war. In Mahabharata, Krishna doesn't fight a war, he's only a Sarthi. What are they telling us? Anybody wants to take a guess? Anybody? There is a very inherent, very distinct Siddhanta which is at play here. And somehow you will see that inbuilt in all the Indian leaders, wherever they are. What is that? Anybody wants to take a guess? And that's my last point. Why does Sri Ram fight and Sri Krishna not fight? And? Yes, you're on right line, or you're on this right track. Sri Ram's war was his own to fight, right? Pandava's war was their own to fight. Sri Krishna can only be a mentor and a guide. So what is Sri Krishna saying? He's saying that the karma is your own. You will have to live your karma. You will have to bear the consequences of your karma. And that is why at the end of the 700 shloks of Gita, he's telling Arjun, you must fight. It is your swadharma. All that he's saying, right? He's saying that trust me, leave everything, surrender to me, fight. Yeah. And uske baad, what does he say? Anybody knows? What does he say? सब कुछ होने के बाद क्या बोलते हैं? यथा इच्छसि तथा कुरु. अब तुमको जो सही लगता है वो तुम करो. He's not saying do it because Bhagwan, do it. I'm telling you, no. Dare you not listen to me? No, the point is not that. The point is not because you do what Bhagwan is telling you to. You do because that's your karma. And the karma Siddhanta says, whatever you do, you will face the consequence of it. Nobody else can repent your sins. You will have to do it yourselves. Thank you so much.
Dr. Nico, I want to understand, in the current context, we've spoken about history, we've spoken about the spiritual and metaphysical concept of identity and cultural identity of Bharat. In the current context, especially because we're in agriculture, in academics and in several other walks of life, an assertion of this cultural identity could be a little problematic for a lot of these students and a lot of individuals and a lot of professionals. You as an academic, how do you rationalize that difference between what your cultural identity is and what it ought to be after the import of Western civilization, enlightenment, universal truths and principles, morality, so on and so forth? How do you rationalize it in current context?
Namaste. This is a very, very important question and a very relevant one. And I feel that students have to negotiate various kinds of identities when they are in an institution. So whatever kind of background you come from, there are numerous questions that are answered and then numerous ones that remain unanswered. Primarily because sometimes, or may I say most of the times, we ourselves are unprepared for the kind of identities that we encounter in the educational institutions. But before that, let me anchor the understanding of culture as it ought to be. Because for those who are not aware of what our cultural identity derives from, what it thrives on, what is the substratum of it, then it's very difficult to define yourself. What are you? Where do you come from? Where do you stand? What meaning do you ascribe to yourself? If you have answers to them, then you'll be able to negotiate all kinds of situations that you encounter in your academic life or even in your other life, your professional life, your dharmic life, your family, any kind of circle that you step into. So, the basic statement that they all, Pankajji, Raghavji, Amiji, have said it out and outright. The basic substratum of culture is nothing but dharma. If your culture is anchored in dharma, if your culture is anchored in the sacred, then you can never go wrong. Now, I'll just try and peg certain metaphors of culture to make it a little more clear. How does culture function? As Dr. Uday Shankar said, culture is not just normative, it is formative also. I will add one more step to it. Culture is not normative, it is formative, it is also performative. So your day-to-day acts, when your mother tells you to put a diya in the temple, light the agarbatti, chant a certain stotra, then you are performing it. I'm just talking from the point of view of culture. Let's not go into the ritual part of it. The performance of it also is creating an identity for you. So you are pegging your identity as a dharmic person. You are, confirming the identity of the deity that you're worshipping. You say that the Devata is real. So some people say that, is Ganpati real? Is Brahmaji real? Is Saraswati real? Ask a Bhakt. They have actually seen them. So when you worship the Devata is giving you darshan. You are in the presence of the divine. That is what your identity keeps on becoming. Now let me also cite a few examples from my recent trip to Vrindavan. Vrindavan witnessed a lot of upheaval in the 16th century. Great saints like Narayan Dutt, Madhavendra Puri, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to Vrindavan and they discovered lots of forms of Radha Krishna from these ponds. And the track that they took, जो रास्ता उन्होंने अपनाया वृंदावन में चलने का, उसमें बहुत सारे वन हैं, उपवन हैं, उसमें बहुत सारे घाट हैं और उसमें बहुत सारे कुंज हैं, मंदिर हैं. So what became their path? Became the pilgrimage for the rest of the people in Vrindavan. So what is happening in a pilgrimage? You are traversing the same path as those people. You are walking the same path. You are intersecting, interacting with the divine. You are constantly recreating that divinity. Then your identity is also forming into a divine form. Secondly, if you go to a temple in Vrindavan, I went to Radha Ramanji and there was a very beautiful Samaj Gayan. They sing hymns to the deity. It was going on. Then there was Vanshi Seva. On certain days, Radha Ramanji receives what is known as Nritya Seva. A very, very famous actress performs the Nritya Seva to the deity. Now, who are we doing it for? We are doing it for the deity. But in that process, we are also deriving our identity from that deity. Now, behind the deity's temple, there is a samadhi of the great saint, Gopal Bhatt ji, जिन्होंने उन deity का, राधा रमण जी का प्राकट्य स्थान बताया था कि यहाँ पर राधा रमण जी प्रकट हुए थे और मैंने इनको लाकर इस मंदिर में रख दिया है. So, while we sit here in IIT Kharagpur, I live in Delhi, other people, you may have come from some metros. Our lives are very, very different. But what I've witnessed in Vrindavan is the daily performance of this life. And there are numerous young people like you who go to that place every day. Why do they go? What do they get there? Because that is one anchor for your identity. That is one peg where you see yourself as the person that you are. In the grand scheme of Bharati epistemology and ontology, you place yourself and you say, okay, I belong here. This entire heritage is mine. So I will also go one step ahead and put my foot in the door and say, culture is this huge repository of knowledge. Knowledge is what defines our culture. Why do you think we have survived so far? It is not because of some vague things like, doing certain things like pop culture does, singing, dancing, going to a discotheque. It is not this. Maybe these are part of your lives now, which is okay. Go through that phase also and discover it for yourself. But what is pegging our culture into our Bharatiya civilization is the repository of knowledge that it carries. What is this infinite reservoir of knowledge called? What we are, learning every day, the Indian knowledge systems. Indian knowledge systems is that entire open architectural framework of knowledge which contains this axiomatic knowledge to which various shastras and various poetics and literatures and symbols say that, okay, we derive our knowledge from this axiomatic source. This is our doctrine, but this is our praman. So we all belong to one place, and this is an open architecture. So therefore, it has a lot of space to accommodate other kinds of knowledges into it. So I think that the Indian cultural identity, the Hindu cultural identity gives you infinite space to fit yourself into any kind of identity that you may dream of. There is space for the Aghori, there is space for the Jaina monk. So dharmic substratum is this huge, ocean in which there are numerous bubbles that keep on forming, that they also keep on dissolving. So today, one sampradaya rises, it goes down. If it is not theologically strong, it goes down. Why do you think pop culture changes so fast? Because unless it has a very strong ontology or epistemology, no culture can survive. This is what dharma gives you. This is what Indian knowledge systems give you. Now coming to the essence of the question that Nupur asked, that where is your place in all of this? Your place in all of this is not first of all to perform, but first of all to absorb and understand what all Indian culture means. What does Bharatiyata entail for all of us? Because unless you live it, go visit these places, go see the temples, go to the pilgrimages. There is no other way. You cannot find this knowledge sitting in books, though there are plenty of them. Indian knowledge system is this huge repertoire of knowledge. But you cannot understand identity by sitting in a library. You can understand culture only by interacting with people, living with people, interacting with cultures, becoming a part of it. This is what if you start doing, there'll be no doubts in your mind as to what you are and what you can become. Thank you so much.
So, I think if I understand everybody correctly, the general consensus of this panel is that the cultural identity of Bharat, of India, is rooted in Hindu dharma. Did I get that right? I think there is a general consensus. So before I go on to address and get everybody here to address the elephant in the room, now that we have all been nice and spoken about spirituality and metaphysics and history and all of that, I'd like to ask the audience, how many of you agree that the cultural identity of a Bharatiya and the cultural identity of this nation, which is now a secular nation by law and by constitution, is rooted in Hindu dharma? By a show of hands. Okay, I think it would be easier to ask how many of you don't agree that the civilizational and cultural identity of Bharat is rooted in Hindu dharma. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so about a small fraction, but yes, there are enough people for us to now go on to address the elephant in the room. Now, yes, there is general consensus that it is rooted, our civilizational and cultural identity is rooted in Hindu dharma. And because of that notion, or because of that value belief that we hold, we've also seen a lot of conflict, increasingly so, almost on a yearly basis, where there is a battle between cultural identities, where even the judiciary, which is supposed to be the interpreter of law, have now taken on the mantle and become dharma gurus. They have become dharma gurus to tell you whether you can burst crackers or not, whether that's a part of your cultural identity or not, how high the dahi handi should be, right? Who can enter Sabrimala, who cannot enter Sabrimala, whether you can offer milk to on Nag Panchami or not, whether you should feed beggars or do your rituals as far as Shivji is concerned. So the judiciary is also taken on the mantle of Dharma Gurus, and this is essentially a symptom of the cultural battle and civilizational thought battle that we seem to be going through now. While we say that the cultural identity of Bharat is Hindu, we do have a multiplicity of faiths. And when we talk about dharma, we do have religions and we do have beliefs that the core of which is, I wouldn't say adharmic in the sense that I am calling it adharmic, even though I'm sure people know where I come from. But let's be a little careful with our words. But in the true sense of the word, adharmic, which is not dharmic. And I think there can be general consensus that a lot of the faith that edifies is also anti-dharma in the sense that it is built and it functions on tearing dharma down. It is anti-polytheist, it is anti-idol worshipping. I'm talking about Abrahamic faiths. And therefore, when we talk about the Bharatiya cultural identity, we also have to talk about the conflict between dharmic identity and the conflict of dharmic identity with those identities which find their existence also in tearing their dharmic identity down as a core tenet of that faith. Because unless that is rationalized, you don't know what direction the nation is going in. If you believe, or if we believe on this panel, that the nation should be taking a dharmic direction, there is a large part of this nation and a large part of its civilization and a large part of its citizens who believe that the direction should be completely different and completely opposite to what Sanatan Dharma stands for. Which is why we've also seen events such as end Sanatan Dharma, death to Sanatan Dharma, so on and so forth, by elected representatives. They represent at least what a fraction of the people of India believe. So what role does religion play in the cultural identity of Bharat? Again, not individuals, but the cultural identity of Bharat, which is a culmination of thousands of years of civilization. What role does religion play, Pankajji? And how do we rationalize that? And I'd ask everybody to keep their answers limited to 5 minutes so we can actually go to the audience, especially the 10 people who disagree. Because I think that's what will make this panel more interesting. So please, Pankajji, go ahead.
Thank you. So the question here basically is that is there a space for different ways of life? In a country like Bharatvarsh, is there a space for different ways of life?
No, sorry, I'm going to interject. Not different ways of life. How do you rationalize the conundrum between a dharmic faith and a faith that is built on decimating the dharmic faith? It's not a way of life. See, if a tribal cult, wherever from somewhere in the world, believes that murder and rape is a civilizational tradition that they followed, we are not going to call it culture. We won't say, oh, they're such cultured people, they like to rape and plunder. So, how do you rationalize that civilizational battle between?
Yeah, exactly. I'm coming towards that just because, so the question here is just because there can be infinite ways to truth, which we keep saying, there are infinite ways to truth, doesn't mean every path is the right path. There can be paths which are leading you towards exactly the opposite direction. So, yes, there are infinite ways to the same truth, but that doesn't mean every path, every set, every way of life is correct. But the question which I was saying is are we saying that there is just a space in India for one way of living, one worldview? No, but that is essentially the idea of Sanatan Dharma. Yes, it is universal, but that universal has now been confined within the confines of what we now know as modern Indian nation. There was a time in the history of the world where no sect sought to destroy other sect and other ways of life in religion, where everyone's gods and deities were respected, even though armies fought with each other. But then certain sects and ideologies came, which believe that only my way of life is the highway, and all other ways of life are so wrong that they should be ended, and violently and forcefully. And now when those ideas compete, not just all over the world, but within the boundaries of your modern Indian nation, then that cannot be included when we talk about inclusion in the idea of dharma. And so that's where the idea of Sanatan Dharma is synonymous with the idea of Bharatvarsh, because that is the universal idea that should have been elsewhere, everywhere, but that is now confined to this modern Indian nation. By protecting Sanatan Dharma, we are actually giving abhay to different ways of life who are cultural, really cultural. We define culture and identity. We are giving abhay. And I would say that is the Sanatan case for the world. If there is a Sanatan umbrella all over the world, they have an abhay to be what they want to be within those cultural confines, so that any ideology which is predatory doesn't take over and destroy that idea. That is why the idea of Sanatan Dharma is synonymous with the idea of Bharatvarsh. Nothing, there is no idea of Bharatvarsh which has something other than Sanatan Dharma in its idea. That is where I would like to end.
Now, Raghavji, I will not let you go that easily. So I will ask you something where you'll have to give me a real answer. Our constitution is secular, and therefore any civilizational or cultural identity of this nature, of this nation state, has to, by law, be divorced from religion. However, we believe, and I think it is a widely held belief, even within the limited confines of the constitution, that India is a civilizational nation. It is a civilizational land and an entity with a cumulative knowledge of thousands and thousands of years. However, when we became a nation state, the great minds decided that we should be divorced from our ancient civilization and our knowledge systems, thereby also making space to say that, okay, if you believe that the ancient civilizational identity of this nation should be wiped out, and therefore you say that it is a part of your faith that this identity should not exist, you have an equal right to profess that idea as somebody who believes in the ancient civilization and the ancient identity of this land. For example, when, again, I'm going to be little contemporary so we can actually be a little more relatable. When the Triple Talaq judgment was happening, the honorable judges opened the Quran and they said that, all right, this practice finds no mention in the Quran and therefore it can be abolished. And they therefore, at that moment, they took on the role of dharma gurus, of interpreters of religion and not interpreters of law. And that dichotomy we've seen in the judiciary over and over again. We've also seen it in the polity, in the government. Now, my direct question to you is, when we say that the civilizational identity of Bharat is that rooted in Hindu dharma, but legally, constitutionally, we are bound to give equal respect to an ideology and to a faith system that believes that your very existence of dharma is an affront to their faith. How do you then confidently say or assert that the cultural identity is Bharatiya when your own state and our own judiciary, our own government says you're wrong? We are secular, we have to give equal respect to even those who want to break your idols and kill you.
I think we are a stillborn republic because the nonsense of palimpsest, where anything can be written over something else. This is the Nehruvian nonsense that has guided the formation of the modern Indian Republic. It is just illogical, not just self-serving, but it is just, it doesn't stand the scrutiny of logic, because there is no system in the world, whether it is your family or this institution or anything else, that can hold without actually having something as a core. For anything to be built, for anything to be sustained, every periphery has to be integrated into the core. That is the way things sustain. Whether you see it in your family rituals, whether you see it in your academic rituals, there is a Sanatana Dharma core, that is the Bharatavarsha. Unfortunately, when India became a republic, we did not have the intelligence to assert that core, because we had this doubt about ourselves, which has been seeded, nourished and nurtured by the colonial education system. And of course, we can grant them a bit of allowance because they were coming from that experience, and therefore They were trying to do some things which they felt were right. But we should not have any question in our mind standing today and scrutinizing that this instrument is not serving our purpose to build an enduring civilization. It cannot, simply because it does not have the fundamental basis of Dharma. Right? And this is nothing to do with how you and I feel. Even if you think very logically from a systems perspective, anything that wants to annihilate you, anything that wants to destroy you, cannot be part of the same system where you're trying to be a natural organic entity. Nation is an organic entity. You cannot have something that is antithetical to that. So I completely agree. There is, in fact, there is no reason to shy away from this, or we should not. The whole idea of cultural identity is that Sanatana Dharma and not some idea of palimpsest where something can be there, something can be written over it as if we are just a slate. We are not a slate. We are fire. You cannot just extinguish that fire. So what we need to do is find out. Of course, we have the long battle of finding the fit that is constitutional for the civilizational truth that you and I share. The reason we spoke about the cultural identity from a spiritual lens is because we need to anchor there to understand that this is not immoral. Unfortunately, today you and I are already twice removed from this. We are having to speak in apologetics to make sure that there is receptivity, that it is not seen as immoral. And only when we have somebody who is as strong a provocator as Nupur is, that you and I are able to actually wash that, that hesitance away and speak the truth as it should be spoken. The fact is that some of these ideologies are not compatible. They should be made compatible by asking them to relook at their theology. And this should come from that community, ideally. Unfortunately, we've seen very, very little evidence of it. If anything, we've not seen that movement in that direction. We've seen the movement in exactly the opposite direction. They've grabbed the secular state, they've grabbed the constitutional mechanisms that have been given to them to actually increase and entrench their power to have a bargain with the state. And that is unfair, and that cannot be sustained. So the simple answer to your question is that there is no compatibility, but going back to what Pankaj said, Sanatana Dharma does not mean that it will exclude and there will be violence. Once you actually think about this theology, Rinkuji spoke about ontology and epistemology, that is there. But the third element in this, which is also coming to us from a distinguished alum of this institution, Sai Deepak Ji, when he talked about Bharatiya and Constitution, he spoke about OET. He said theology, which is the telos, as my friend Amrit likes to call it, the theology has to be changed. Unless you are willing to purge the belief that you have that nobody else has a right to live except as your religious denomination, you are not part of a civil society. And to understand this, you don't need to, sometimes it becomes a little difficult for us to face this cognitive dissonance because we don't like to think about ourselves as bad people, right? None of us like to feel that about ourselves. You develop a distance from India and look at what's happening in the world. Look at the world politics and say, show me one area where multiculturalism has worked. One area. This liberal nonsense and the hill that they've chosen to die on, which is the Abrahamic faith, is not going to survive in the global civilization, or the global civilization is not going to survive that. So we don't even need to worry about being right in a prudish sense about Bharat. Just look at the world as it is today, critically and intellectually, and you will notice that this is just violence. We are just being trained, indoctrinated into suffering violence by the state, and that should end.
Thank you, Raghuvji. Amiji, now that we've spoken about competing religious ideologies within Bharat, from within the Hindu fold, there is a bit of a dichotomy where many Hindus want to believe that Hinduism is a way of life and therefore everything goes. You can pick and choose whatever you want. Oh, you don't believe in idol worship, that's fine. You're still a Hindu. You don't believe in moksha, oh, that's fine. You're still a Hindu. Right? Everything goes. You can pick and choose. It's like an a la carte menu where you can choose. You can almost custom make your own Hinduism. And when you talk about a religion, which is you brand a religion a way of life and say that everything goes, everything comes, nothing is really sacred and nothing is really permanent. And when you don't know the boundaries of that religion, you don't know how to define your cultural identity rooted in that religion and tradition either. Because what may be a cultural identity rooted in dharma for you and your view of this quote unquote way of life, it might not be a cultural identity for somebody else, because they might view Sanatan Dharma as a way of life completely differently. So, what do you believe are those non-negotiables of cultural identity, if at all it is rooted in Sanatan Dharma? And is there any historical perspective on that you can give us?
I think this way of life versus religion is an ongoing debate. And if we see the way different sampradayas have also evolved, right? For now, I'm not even speaking about the other theologies, just within Sanatan Dharma. We have different sampradayas, and those different sampradayas have had their own takes. There have been some very inherent, like we talk about metaphysics, which everyone tends to believe, yeah. But you still have Arya Samaj who will say no Murti Puja versus others who say Murti Puja. But still, Arya Samaj will believe in Karma Siddhanta. Arya Samaj will believe in Punarjanma, right? So some of these metaphysics are still very similar. But when we talk about the boundaries of what are the boundaries that at least one has to, say, ki, Acha, this has to be there for somebody to be a Hindu. It can't just be Hindu in the name only. Like if I'm born in a Hindu family, is that enough? Is the question essentially, right? So how do we see this? If we look at our Pauranic stories, right? We talk about the Devasur Sangram, okay? What is this Devasur Sangram? It's really a tragedy that today we are making every clash about identities, which is coming from this whole Marxist communist side, right? Everything is about identity. If a Ram Ravan Yuddha has to happen, that is because Aryan Dravidian. Arey yaar, come on, everybody is called Arya, and Ravan is a Brahman Putra, as we see there, right? Also, if we see Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu, who were all Asuras, so to say. But were they a different tribe? No, they were not a different tribe. Still, they had to be killed. Still, they had to be dealt with. What was the issue, right? Because at some point, they all started thinking that I am supreme and my word is law, right? They started behaving in such a way, like as I said previously, that if my dharma is violating your dharma, then this dharma is not valid. You can allow coexistence as long as we have that mutual respect to allow that space where you live your way, I live my way. But if you want to destroy me, that cannot be allowed, right? Because that is violating my dharma. So how did our ancestors define this, right? There were some things, as I said, Karma Siddhanta, Punarjanma, which have been consistent across. If you see the 6 darshanas, also some of these things have been there, where also there is stress on individuals trying to find their path towards moksha. So moksha is also very, very inherent. And what is moksha at the end of the day, right? Moksha is one, yes, getting liberation, but it is that state where you transcend your own prakriti. Now this prakriti, as actually when Pankaj was saying that prakriti and Sanskriti, when you refine prakriti, you get Sanskriti. That's what we talk about. But then what is this prakriti? When we say Asurik prakriti and what we say as Daivik prakriti, where the Devasur Sangram actually begins, is when we say Daivik Sanskriti, we are saying values. Which are these values? Dhriti, Kshama, Damo, Asteyam, Indriya Nigraha, right? And in all of this, Indriya Nigraha is the key. Our culture, our stress, the stress of our civilization has always been towards personal development and controlling our senses, which means that you don't go on and exploit nature as you wish, which means you don't go on and do exactly as you wish, my way or highway, my God or no other God. No, we have not ever said that, right? We have said that whatever I do has to be in a way that it is sustainable. Sustainable for what? Any unit that I'm a part of. Am I part of a family? Am I part of a civilization? Am I part of a society? Am I part of a community? Are my actions aligned in a way that they help sustain and they help that organization thrive? If I'm not living in that way, that is completely asurik, where I say my way or highway, right? So when I say boundaries of Hindu Dharma, I know your question is more specific in the sense of what would be my non-negotiables. So one is very much that you have to believe in certain siddhantas, which is karma, punarjanma, moksha, and also this thing of giving me space to live my dharma. You cannot want to destroy it, right? I need to be able to practice my dharma. If you don't give me that, then there is an issue. This is exactly what the Asuras did, right? They said, no gods, no Vishnu, no this, no that, just me. What is Hiranyakashipu doing? He's saying, just me, I am the god, worship me or there is no other way. That can't be allowed. In Sanatan Dharma, you have to give space for various such thoughts to come to life, to fight their battles and to survive in a right way that is sustainable to everybody. As Rinkuji mentioned, right, that every sampradaya, they stood or they survived or they died depending on their own theological and ethical value system, how strong they were. It was not meant on taking away something from somebody else, because eventually what do we say? Ishavasya idam sarvam yat kinchit jagatyam jagat yena tyaktena bhunjitha ma krida kasyasvidhinam. We say this, everything is eventually that Isha, that Ishwar, that divinity is in everything, right? That divinity or that divinity that gives you all these luxuries and comforts and everything, that has to be definitely enjoyed, but enjoyed with a sense of surrender and gratitude, and not try to take on something that is somebody else's, right? Today we are dealing with faith systems which are not happy with what they have, but they want to encroach on yours. And whenever that has happened in our stories as well, when the encroachment has happened, our heroes have put their step down and they have said, enough, this cannot be allowed. And for me, all this will be non-negotiables.
So now that Amiji has spoken about thus far and no further, and we've spoken about competing religious ideology, there is a competing political ideology which does not seem to understand the concept of thus far and no further, which is wokeness. And that we've seen in the academic world far more than in any other space, encroaching on individual cultural identities, not just of Bharat, not just rooted in Hindu Dharma, but generally of every faith system across the world. So, how do you see the cultural identity of India holding on to itself when you're under the onslaught of not just competing faiths, but also of competing political ideologies like wokeness, which has percolated far deeper than we imagine? We do have competitive gender identity politics being played at the highest echelons of power. It has even, the lexicon has even reached the Supreme Court now. So it is being systematically legitimized, and you have reached a point where if you say that I don't subscribe to this enforced political ideology and I don't believe in what you're trying to get me to believe in, you automatically become a bad person. And the fear and the guilt psychosis that young citizens often go through, that oh my god, if this woman is claiming that she's a man, and if I don't agree that she's a man, then I am a really terrible person because I don't believe what she's telling me. I can see that she's not, but if I disagree with her, I'm a bad person, and therefore I must agree with her. And then when that ideology finds ratification and sanction from the highest echelons of power, along with the cancel culture, a lot of students are not going to speak up. A lot of full grown functioning adults are not going to speak up about what they believe in because they fear that the society which has succumbed to this political ideology is simply going to pick you up and throw you out of it. You will not get jobs, you will not have friends, so on and so forth. So how do you rationalize that battle? Because while it's honestly easier to talk about competing religious ideologies now than it is to talk about this competing political ideology, because we haven't found a lexicon yet. So how do we rationalize that battle?
So this is a really, really tough question to answer when you're a young person in the academe. So what happens is you encounter people of various identities. But what one has to understand is when a person states their orientation, what are they talking about? They're talking about their identity as one factor. You know, it is the sexuality that they are proclaiming. But what are you? Once you know who you are, once you understand yourself with the capital S, once you have a clear understanding of yourself, then you can deal with the other person. A very, very shortcut method to handling all these diverse identities is by digesting them. You know, dharma has space for everyone. You talk about A, B, C, D, E. You talk about various kinds of animals that people identify with. There is space for everyone in Dharma. So once you know who you are, it is easy to deal with such identities. Plus, you may be at a position where there may be some personal costs. You may lose some friends. You may lose certain associations, certain adherences to certain groups. But once you understand how this is played, because people who proclaim a certain orientation, people who proclaim a certain identity, which is different from what is the norm, what are they playing at? Because disruption and rebellion is the playground in which the democracies are manipulated, and people like you or people who think on lines of what is the right thing to do, think about a higher self, they can be manipulated. So you have to sit back, understand yourself, anchor yourself to the metaphors of your own culture, and then speak to those people. Once you know where you stand, it becomes very, very simple to negotiate all those identities. I will also take, the example of Durga here, certainly a very fierce aspect of the goddess. What she did with Rakta Bij, she created innumerable rupas of herself and she licked all the blood that fell. So in that manner, आपको भी साम दाम दंड भेद सब चीज़ें अपना कर बहुत सारी आइडेंटिटीज़ को अपने अंदर absorb करना पड़ेगा. You may be able to handle it by certain actions, you may be able to handle it through dialogue, but the baseline remains that you have to digest all these identities and show the way through Dharma. There is no two ways about it. There is no ambiguity here that Dharma can provide you with all the answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think if everybody is okay with it, we can go to audience questions. Okay. So I'd like first a couple of questions from those who disagree with the panel. If anyone would like to ask a question who disagree with the panel, please raise your hand, first and foremost, and then we can come to those who agree. Nobody? I thought there were at least 10 people that we counted who disagreed. Huh? They answered already? Sorry? They got the answers. That's a fantastic panel then, so I think we can just clap for the panel first. Yeah, go on.
Thank you so much. I'm a fourth year undergraduate student from the Department of Electrical Engineering. I slightly disagree with the panel in terms of like we have seen recently that there have been many clashes. Yesterday we saw one in Israel. There were many in the past. We had in Kashmir, we had them in Manipur. And somewhere it comes from, people identifying themselves to some a particular culture, or they have a particular identity and they are going against the other one. So my question is, let's say we have a hypothetical situation where everybody loses their culture and they bind themselves through, let's say, a set of rules like something like constitution. So will it be a better society rather than like thousands of cultures and uniting them together? Is it better that we just have one constitution and people following that?
So you're saying the end of all cultural identities and the basis of a nation state being only the constitution. That's your question. And
I'd like to take that. Actually, what you propose has already happened in the world. When even before that, the idea of enlightenment is that. The central idea of enlightenment is that it is the idea of our divine which makes us fight with each other. So the divine authority of the king. So let us remove that divine. Let us replace that with the idea of a very abstract idea of a sovereign to which everyone bows to. And that is exactly the white man's burden. That the entire world is living in darkness. Tribes are fighting with each other over gods and deities. Let us take, we have found the truth for the first time, which is historical in nature, which is bound upon time, which we, the white Western civilization, has found finally, and we need to take this message to the entire world. Never before, and so much violence has been done in any other idea than the idea, this idea, that colonial idea, which is actually the idea of enlightenment. that we have to bring these high values, which is the sort of nihilist value that you take, that we lose all of culture, then we recreate it with the idea of sovereignty and constitution. That is exactly the debate, central debate of enlightenment. And Immanuel Kant, one of their greatest summarizers, he actually says this, and it is no different from a conquistador, from the idea of a conquistador. He says, for us to bear the fruits of enlightenment in Europe, the entire world needs to be converted into our ideas of state, polity, and society. So that is exactly the idea of conquest. So when we talk about in these ideas, actually that has happened, and that has resulted in a lot of violence. That nihilism never yields into any non-violent Chittabhumi or social bhumi.
I think Amiji wants to add something.
So actually, this is a great question, and I'll tell you why. You know, when all our Dharma Shastras they begin, be it Arthashastra or in Shanti Parva in Mahabharata, it starts with this: what is the need of a king? Okay, that's how it starts. What was the need of the king? And we talk about the different yugas, yeah, Dharma, Treta, Satyug, vagare, vagare. So they say Satyug mein everybody had great value systems. What are these great value systems? As long as people are living very peacefully with one another, we don't even need a constitution, no? We will be self-regulated if it's a self-regulated society. But then what happened? Dhire dhire, the human tendencies, because we are what? Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, right? There is Kam, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mad, Matsarya. All that we have. That starts manifesting. Somebody has more, I want that. That greed starts happening. Dhire dhire, Matsya starts happening. What is Matsya? Now this is all given in that. मैं अपना कुछ नहीं कह रही हूँ. ठीक है? This is how they are saying what is the need for the king. So then Matsya happened. Now what is Matsya? As we are seeing, the strongest, the tolerant always loses, and the strongest bully will have its way, right? Bada machli chota machli ko khata hai. Is that situation sustainable? Will that kind of a society sustain? No, people will kill each other, right? Now, if you then need to make a sustainable society, what do you need? You need somebody who all of you agree and you put on the top, and they say, okay, you now tell us what is the way to live. Okay, in what way should we interact with one another? In what way should, if somebody commits a crime, then how should that be dealt with? So that in the society, everybody is at least, there is at least a reason why people would follow the value systems that we have, right? And that's how then Raja came, and that's how then the Dharma Shastras got written, and that's how the story goes. Okay. Now the situation that you are talking about is basically saying, let's go back to that Matsya system. Okay. And now let's recreate. What will come out of that recreation if you want a good society? There is a reason why we are called Sanatan Dharma. Because this is exactly what will come. Right? Because in our Dharma, if you see, what are the boundary conditions? The boundary conditions are ethics. When we say Dharmasya Dasha Lakshanam, what are the Dasha Lakshanam they are talking about? They are talking about ethics. Right? Now these ethics, how do you get people to actually live them? That's when other things come into play. That's when your belief system, that's when your metaphysics and everything comes into play, right? So things start building on that. So what you will come to is again the situation, and then again there will be people. Now, in spite of all that, there will still Asuras. Asuras were not different people. They were born of the same father. Kashyap Muni ke hi the, Sur or Asur dono, right? So then there were people who still couldn't be controlled. Their Kam, Krodha, Lobha, Moha. They would be like, only this life. Now, there's a biggest difference between Dev and Asur. Asuras are like, this is the life. This is the body. There is nothing beyond that. Okay, one life, jo hum baat karte hain. Devas are like, no, the Karma Siddhanta matters. That goes with the Punarjanma. That will ensure you work in a certain way. That will ensure that you behave in an ethical way, right? So it will come back to what you're saying. Jo hamara hai, wahi aayega. That is how it started. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you're saying that most of these kids, they keep saying YOLO, that's Asurik?
Absolutely. According to our belief system, that is very much Asuric.
All right, great.
I have been listening to this panel, and of course, the question whether a basis should be on Sanatana Dharma and all of it. But I have a question that our whole process of belief system formation for all of us, it is very gradual, and it is by virtue of different formal and informal mechanisms, whether it is the education system or the family or the culture in which each one of us is born, we different religions, different systems. Now, a panel as this, which of course has opened up so many dimensions in all of us, it looks very exciting, it looks perhaps very relevant. But as a psychologist, my question is that how do we weave all of this in the mainstream education system, which is fair? And there is a very gradual immersion into what should be, because I do not know if these kind of sessions actually can be carried far and for long, especially amongst the generation that has already passed through 12 years of schooling and come into an IIT system, and all of us who are already past mid ages. So how do we bring it more systematically and in a very coherent manner? All of this is my thing, so that it becomes very sustained and it does not restrict itself just to a panel.
Is this question for somebody specifically?
Not specific, it's to the entire
Anybody
panel.
can answer.
Yes.
So I think in some ways the answer lies in the Indian Knowledge System Center for Excellence that's already there at IIT Kharagpur, because that's the fundamental work that's happening. But let's try and understand the ascent of culture or a set of cultures into a civilization and what has been the Bharatiya way, because that holds the clue to get back to, because there's a charge of trying to go back, trying to be revisionist, you're agitational when you talk about civilization. That is actually a very low level charge, because none of us are foolish enough to believe that we are actually going to recreate the exact conditions that were. What we're trying to understand are what are the fundamental principles, what are the axiomatic truths, what is the ontology, and what is the way to verify that, and what is the way for you to validate, what is the praxis, which is what we call culture. So to answer the question of what is the way to embed this into our culture so that we don't actually have to do this session separately, it's a very important question, because the reason you and I are having to talk about this separately is because we are already removed from it. Like for example, yesterday there was a folk dance and somebody mentioned this, I think Richaji only mentioned this, or somebody else mentioned that for them nature is not separate. Kapil Tiwari ji, when somebody asked him, what do you think about the environmental problem? He is a Padma Award winner, he works with the tribals in Chhattisgarh. He said this question does not make sense to the tribal. That this understanding that you are something different from nature. Only if you are removed from it can you ask the question of saving nature. Do you ask the question, do you want to save yourself? So this is our imposition. This is an elite, English educated, colonial impacted mind that is saying we need to actually save someone or save environment. Similarly, if we have to actually live our culture, it has to be part of our education system, which is the grand vision of the Indian knowledge system's paradigm. I see this at 4 levels. The first level is we are not even aware of the dangers of one life metaphysics. Every single thing that you do, if you really look at the difference between one life metaphysics versus Punarjanma, is the only way you can have a sustainable planet. There is no way that 10 billion people are going to have the American lifestyle and we are not going to extract what is there now. We are simply going to die. Planet will take its charge, we will die. Because that is the direction, that is the cultural goal that is being given to you and I, that there is only one definition of a happy life. The happy life is to actually sensorily, completely exhaust yourself, and to do that you need a consumerist economy. To do that you need a capitalistic logic. This is a central problem that is driving all of the other issues today. The only way out of this is something that is 10 billion people but self-regulated and self-organized. That is the systems theory. Self-regulated and self-organized is only when you anchor on truth. And that truth is that it is not just enough to have a material identity, you need a spiritual sacred identity. Doesn't matter who you are, at what stage of life you are at, whether you are a student, whether you are a professional, whether you are reaching your deathbed, all of us will go through the fundamental 4 ashramas. You are young for some time, you are married for some time, you approach old age for some time, and then you die. How does life actually give you meaning in those stages if you are only going to anchor on materiality? So this has to become part of your existence. That was achieved in this civilization. The thing that I spoke about, the wonder that is Bharat is that this deepest metaphysics is there in the tribal in Odisha as it is there in the Vedantin who is sitting in a big mata. How did that happen? It happened through 3 master institutions that this civilization created. The first institution, the entire idea is to sacralize space and time. They did that with the first institution, the emphasis on family. to answer Richaji's question about where do samskaras form, we have a national mission pending to actually educate our parents or parents who are, young people who are going to be parents soon, about the idea of Garbha Samskar itself, about the idea of what is the preciousness of life, what has your civilization told you about what is the care you need to take when you birth something. It has to begin there. And that is why, in our organization, when we talk about cultural storytelling, when we talk about rituals, we are trying to bring that understanding back in an accessible manner. So the first institution that the civilization created, which we need to go back, and that is also linked to the danger of the woke-centric culture today, is that they are trying to storm the last bastion that is there for global civilization. This is not an India-specific problem. It is family. When you approach meaninglessness to the highest level, you will break all the things that hold you. And the thing that they're trying to break is now the family. The second institution that this civilization has given you is the Indian knowledge systems, or the Guru, the Gurukula. What needs to happen is this embedding of the Indian ontological, epistemological, axiology and praxis into the fundamental primary education, into making sure that the Guru is an exemplar. That is the civilizational way. To rediscover, because we can't directly go back to the Gurukula system, we can't even go back to exactly how it was. We need to get access to the Indian knowledge system first. Your Itihasa Purana should not be something that Amiji is doing from outside. Your Itihasa Purana should be something that you're taught. I regret not being taught this. I am doing what I'm doing because I know the loss that I have. I had to have a protracted journey going out 15-20 years and then come back, and I fear now because I'm a father. I fear that my child will also grow up without ever understanding Natya Shastra, without understanding Yoga Sutra, without understanding Ashtadhyayi, without understanding Itihasa Purana. This is the Indic knowledge system. Indic knowledge system is a complex of at least 5 or 6 different streams. You have the Vedic stream, you have the Buddhist stream, you have the Jaina stream, you have the folk knowledge system, you have the tribal knowledge system, you have the Sikh knowledge system. All of these things which have shared metaphysics of Dharma, have looked at life similarly, have created this knowledge system, which is the way in which you and I actually continue being part of one civilization. Just a simple moment of wonder. You walk down this road, you will see a 700, 800-year-old temple, not maybe even 2 kilometers from here. That is the abundance we have. And sometimes abundance breeds, insufference and almost irritability, because we don't even realize that something has been preserved for 700 years. Now, if you listen to what happens in that, 700 years ago, the sound that was uttered is also the sound that is uttered today. There is no digital technology. There is no way to actually have this communication revolution. What did they do? They made their body itself the temple of that knowledge. They did Kantastha. They created the greatest technology ever in actually memorizing all of this and creating the pattern for recreation, for transference, right? So once we do that, once we understand Indian knowledge system as the greatest act of empathy, they've done that so that you don't have to suffer the things that have been discovered and learned by people before you. The human condition is always the same. There are certain cultures in which knowledge propagates and continues so that the human suffering can come down. So the second institution that needs to come back is the Indian knowledge systems, that needs to be not as a center in some part of institutions. It has to be the fundamental epistemology through which all other subjects are taught. The third institution that this civilization created, because remember, culture is a part and is learned as socialized process. We will not understand culture unless you take part in it, unless you immerse yourself in that. That is when they created the institution of temple, where they brought all of these things together. Temple is the place for your social activities. Temple is the place for your agricultural produce and economic distribution. Temple is the place for arts. Temple is the place for education. Temple is the place for religion. Temple is the place for metaphysics. Unless we reclaim with respect the idea of temple as an institution, we will not be able to see this. So what needs to happen is a partnership with academia and civil society, which will then inform the polity. Academics have to pay respect to the knowledge system of the land, and there needs to be an institutional mechanism to be teaching this, to be talking about this. This has to be augmented by the civil society, where we are sharing stories of culture, where we are creating the demand and the feedback back to the academia that this is the right thing to do. You give us more courses, we will actually come learn. We have to send this feedback together to the polity that we need a different kind of constitution, which is absolutely inclusive, because that is Sanatana Dharma. It does not exclude anything, but at the same time, it does not tolerate viciousness. For all of these things, this is an integrated question. It's not just an education question. This is a civilization question. This is a constitutional question. This is a social question. This is a personal and psychological question. All of these things need to come together. What we are working on is to try and create the conditions fertile for this. Thank you.
Namaste. I'm Karan Kataria, research scholar in the Department of Electrical Engineering. My question is to Pankaj ji. In the context of Sanatan Dharma, you rightly said that it provides the universal truth. Now, but recently I've seen Sanatan Dharma is being used as a platform, especially by Hindu youth, to target Muslims and promote Sanatan Dharma as something else which it is not. For example, Kerala Story movie. And so I would request you a guidance for youth of nation on this, and sincerely request a not politically correct answer but true answer.
Yeah, nobody has ever accused me of being politically correct, so that danger is not there. So, Sanatan Dharma is the universal idea. But when in your universe there are ideas which want to kill universal ideas, it is the greatest dharma to fight those ideas and to make sure that they never plague our world and society again. So, that is right now the greatest dharma, and we have to fight. And I am talking about ideas here. That idea has to be fought and destroyed, so that once again everyone has the abhaya to be what they want to be. That is the Sanatan case for the world. That is in brief, that answer. Thank you.
And you mentioned Kerala Story. I would say go and do a little more research. It is not used for targeting. There is truth to it, a lot of truth to it.
Okay, the rest of the discussion, I'm sure we can have it after the panel. We can convene somewhere where there are no cameras and no recording perhaps, and have a more honest, non-politically correct discussion, one-to-one. But I think now we have to conclude the panel. So thank you so much to the panelists for being so erudite and so honest. And thank you to the audience for asking such wonderful questions and being so attentive. I think we are richer for having this discussion and for getting the insights of these esteemed panelists. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nupurji, for moderating such an eye-opening session. We also thank the panelists for such a thought-provoking and enlightening discussion.